A small, nearly forgotten village, nestled between rolling hills, is home to a decaying ancient church. Its once vibrant stained glass windows are now shattered. The pews are covered in dust, and the air smells of old wood and stone. The village itself has long been abandoned by the hustle and bustle of city life, but the church remains, its secrets preserved behind thick walls and ancient pews. Rumors about the church's dark past circulate in hushed voices, yet no one dares to speak of it aloud. Evelyn Rose arrived in the village under a sky heavy with gray clouds, the first sign of autumn's approach. She had spent the past 5 years studying archaeology, and while her peers were diving into far more glamorous digs, she found herself drawn to this remote village and its church. Legends and whispers about this place intrigued her. Stories from old village records spoke of strange events, disappearances, odd rituals, and, most chilling of all, the church itself. No one had truly investigated its history. It was as if the church held its breath, waiting for the past to be uncovered. After getting directions from a distant relative of the village's last remaining family, Evelyn stood in front of the church gates. The iron bars were rusted, but still strong enough to keep out unwanted visitors. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she slowly pushed them open. Inside, the church smelled faintly of incense, but also of decay. Her flashlight illuminated the stone floors, worn down by centuries of footsteps. The pews, once meticulously arranged, were now broken and scattered. Dust motes floated in the thin rays of light that managed to break through the broken windows, casting a ghostly glow across the interior. She set down her bag and began unpacking her equipment, carefully recording each detail. "This place," Evelyn whispered to herself. "It's as if the church itself has been forgotten." Her first investigation led her to the church's crypt, an area she had hoped to avoid at first. But something compelled her to enter. There she found the first of many strange artifacts, a small, weathered journal hidden under a pile of rubble. The entries, written in a shaky hand, spoke of dark ceremonies, of a power that lingered in the very walls of the church. "The spirit of the church is awake," one of the last entries read. "I fear I am not alone." Evelyn's curiosity piqued, but so did her unease. She couldn't yet understand the journal's meaning, but she knew one thing. There was more to this place than met the eye. The following morning, Evelyn met Pastor Thomas, the elderly priest who had been living alone in the village for years. His thin, white hair was unkempt, his clothes old and faded, but his eyes were sharp, filled with a quiet sadness that Evelyn couldn't quite decipher. "You've come to study the church?" Pastor Thomas asked, his voice gruff yet calm. Evelyn nodded. "I'm an archaeologist. I've read about the history of this place. But I feel there's more here. Something strange." The pastor's expression darkened. "You shouldn't dig into the past too deeply. Some things are better left alone." But Evelyn wasn't the type to back down. "I believe there's something here. Something important. I need to know what happened." Pastor Thomas studied her for a long time, then sighed. "There's a reason no one comes here anymore. The church is more than just bricks and mortar. It holds something evil. It was never meant to be discovered." His cryptic warning only fueled Evelyn's resolve. She had to uncover the truth no matter what. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap set by something that had been waiting for centuries. Days passed, and Evelyn's investigations took her deeper into the church's labyrinthine hallways. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she stumbled upon a hidden door beneath the altar. It was concealed by layers of dust and cobwebs, almost as if it had been waiting for her to find it. The door creaked open with a protest, revealing a staircase that led downward into a chamber that had long been forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and damp earth. Evelyn descended cautiously, her heart pounding with anticipation. The chamber was small but meticulously decorated with symbols she didn't recognize. Faint light glimmered from the corners, and on the floor lay an intricate stone circle, etched with what appeared to be ancient runes. This was no ordinary room. This was a place of power, a place where rituals had been performed, rituals that had no place in the peaceful village that had once surrounded it. As she examined the markings on the walls, a sudden chill swept through the chamber. Evelyn froze. She wasn't alone. A low whisper filled the room, so faint at first that Evelyn thought it was just the wind. But as she listened, the voice became clearer. "Leave, before it's too late." Evelyn spun around, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The room was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Her breath quickened. Something was here, something ancient and powerful. Suddenly the walls seemed to shift. The symbols on the walls pulsed with an eerie light, and the air grew heavy, as if the room itself was alive. The spirit of the church, as described in the journal, had awakened. Evelyn rushed to the journal, flipping through the pages, looking for answers. The entries were becoming more frantic, the last one warning that the spirit could not be contained once it had been stirred. But the journal didn't explain how to stop it. She had to find someone who could help, but she couldn't trust Pastor Thomas. He knew more than he was letting on. Her only hope now was David Brooks, a man who had once lived in the village and whose family had been tied to the church's dark history. The days grew colder as Evelyn's research deepened. She had spent hours poring over old records, her mind consumed by the mystery of the church. But it wasn't until she heard the name David Brooks that things truly began to shift. David had once lived in the village but had left long ago, never to return. Evelyn had heard stories of him from the village's elderly inhabitants, tales of his family's connection to the church and the tragedies that had befallen them. His family had been wealthy once, owning much of the land around the village, but their fortune had vanished as quickly as their influence. Now David lived in the city, and rumors suggested he had stayed away from the village, haunted by the past. But Evelyn needed to find him. She had to understand what had happened to the Brooks family, and she needed answers. A quick search revealed that David had returned to the village, unexpectedly, just a few days ago. She wasn't sure what had brought him back, but she knew one thing: he was her key to unlocking the truth. Evelyn found David Brooks in the local inn, sitting at a corner table, nursing a drink in silence. He was older than she had expected, weathered by time, with a guarded expression that spoke of years spent carrying a heavy burden. His once dark hair had gone gray, and his posture slouched as if the weight of the past had never left him. "David Brooks?" Evelyn approached cautiously, her voice tentative. He looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And who might you be?" "I'm Evelyn Rose. I've been researching the church," she said, her tone measured. "I've heard stories about your family and the church. I believe you know something important." David's expression darkened, his gaze shifting to the half-empty glass in front of him. He didn't say anything for a moment, as if considering whether to speak at all. Finally he sighed and set the glass down. "You've been digging, haven't you? I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. The past has a way of catching up to us." Evelyn sat down across from him, her heart racing. "I need to understand what happened to your family, the church, and it's hiding something terrible. I think it has something to do with your family's downfall." David's eyes flickered with recognition, then quickly turned cold. "You don't know what you're getting into. It's not just the church. It's what happened inside it that has never been spoken of. What we did. What we all did." Evelyn leaned forward. "Please, I need your help. The spirit in the church is awakening, and I don't know how to stop it. The journal I found, it speaks of rituals and dark ceremonies. I believe they're connected to your family." David's face grew pale. "My family was involved in those rituals. My great-grandfather was the one who brought the darkness to the church, and we've been cursed ever since." David's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of guilt and sorrow. He hesitated, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for his drink. "It started when my great-grandfather, Samuel Brooks, came into power. He was a man of ambition, always searching for ways to increase his influence and wealth. But he wasn't satisfied with what he had. He wanted more than money, more than status. He wanted power beyond anything a man should possess. Evelyn listened intently, knowing that the truth she had been searching for was finally coming into focus. Samuel became obsessed with the church, David continued, his voice low and strained. He believed the church was a gateway, a place where he could commune with forces beyond our understanding. He started holding secret rituals beneath the church, in the hidden chamber. At first, it was just whispers, old books, ancient symbols. But then, it escalated. He brought others into it, his followers. They performed dark ceremonies, seeking to tap into forbidden powers that could control life and death. David's eyes narrowed. It was my family who helped Samuel bring those forces into the world. We paid the price for it, we all did. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine as David's words hit home. The journal she had found in the crypt mentioned these same rituals that had been meant to summon something, to unlock something ancient and powerful. But the cost had been too great. The church had become a vessel for something terrible, and now it was waking up. David's face softened with regret. My great-grandfather never understood the consequences. He thought he could control it, but the darkness, it took him. The rituals never stopped even after his death. My family tried to distance ourselves, but the curse was already set in motion. We couldn't escape. Evelyn's mind raced. But the church, it's still here. The rituals are still connected to it. And the spirit that's waking up, is it the result of those rituals? David nodded slowly. Yes. The spirit is the manifestation of everything that was summoned. It's not just an ordinary ghost. It's the culmination of all the sins and bloodshed that took place in that church. It's a being of power, of vengeance. And once it fully awakens, it will consume everything. Evelyn felt the weight of what they were up against. We have to stop it, but how? The journal, it didn't say what we can do. David's face hardened. There is one way to stop it, but it's dangerous. We have to perform the final ritual, the one that was meant to banish the spirit. It requires a sacrifice. Evelyn and David returned to the church that night, the air thick with the tension of what was to come. The full moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the crumbling structure. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the whispering voices returned, louder this time. David led Evelyn down into the crypt, the place where it all began. The hidden chamber was now bathed in an unnatural light, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly. The spirit was awake. We have to perform the ritual here, David said, his voice tight with fear. But it will require a blood offering, a sacrifice. Evelyn swallowed hard. What kind of sacrifice? David's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the full weight of his guilt. One of us, the spirit demands it. Evelyn's heart raced. She had come this far, uncovering the secrets of the church, learning about the curse. But could she truly give her life to stop the horror that had been unleashed? The time for decisions had come. The air in the crypt seemed to thicken with each passing second. The eerie glow from the symbols on the walls pulsed with unnatural energy, casting shadows that danced like living things. Evelyn felt the cold fingers of dread creeping up her spine, but she forced herself to focus. David stood at the center of the room, his face pale, his hands trembling as he traced the intricate markings on the floor, preparing the final ritual. "We don't have much time," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising hum of energy in the chamber. "The spirit is growing stronger. The ritual must be completed before it fully awakens." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She had come here to uncover history, to solve a mystery, but now it was no longer about the past, it was about survival. "What do we do?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The blood sacrifice was the only way to seal the spirit away again. David turned toward her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "One of us must offer ourselves. The spirit demands it to break the curse." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "You mean, one of us has to die?" David didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. He had known this moment was coming. The ritual required not just any sacrifice, but a life, someone whose blood was bound to the church and its dark past. The Brooks family had been tied to the church for generations. their sins too great to be erased without a cost. "David, no," Evelyn said, shaking her head. "There has to be another way." But David's eyes, filled with a quiet acceptance, made it clear that he had already made his choice. "I have to do this," he said softly. "My family has caused this. My great-grandfather, my father, and even I. We are all to blame. I've spent my life running from this curse. But I can't run anymore." Evelyn wanted to scream to tell him he was wrong, that she could find another way, but deep down she knew there was no other choice. The spirit would consume them both if they didn't stop it now. "No," David said, almost reading her mind. "You need to finish the ritual. It's the only way. You need to be the one to seal the circle." He took her hand in his grip firm but gentle. "I'll take the burden of the sacrifice." As David prepared himself to offer his life, Evelyn stood beside him, trembling. She had never felt such fear nor such sadness. The weight of the moment was too much to bear. And yet, she knew what she had to do. The ritual had to be completed. David lowered himself onto the stone altar at the center of the crypt, his eyes closing in silent prayer. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for all the pain we've caused." Evelyn stood behind him, her hands shaking as she opened the ancient book, the pages yellowed and brittle. She had memorized the incantation, but now, as she stood there, she feared that the very words might betray her. Could she do this? Could she truly sacrifice David? But the whispers in the air grew louder, and Evelyn realized with a sickening clarity that the spirit was already feeding on their fear, growing stronger with every second they hesitated. The curse would not be stopped without this final act, and she knew in her heart that David's death would bring closure, not just for him, but for the entire village, for the bloodline of the Brooks family. With a steady breath, Evelyn began the incantation. The words felt foreign on her tongue, ancient and powerful. As she spoke, the air in the crypt began to tremble, vibrating with an energy that made the very walls groan. The symbols on the floor shone brighter, their glow intensifying until the entire room was bathed in an ethereal light. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and a gust of wind howled through the crypt, extinguishing the candle flames in a single breath. David gasped as the ritual took hold, his body jerking violently. His breath quickened, and for a moment, Evelyn feared that he might be consumed by the spirit before the ritual was complete. But she continued, her voice rising with the power of the incantation, her hands shaking but steady. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the room, a sound like the breaking of the world itself. The air grew thick, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tear apart. A dark figure, a shadow of something ancient and terrifying, rose from the center of the crypt. It was massive, its form a swirling mass of smoke and shadows, eyes glowing with an unearthly light. The spirit had come, but it was too late. As Evelyn finished the incantation, the room exploded in light. A wave of energy surged through her, and David let out a final, agonized cry as the light consumed him. In that instant, the dark figure screamed in rage, but it was no match for the power of the ritual. The light intensified, blinding Evelyn, and then everything went silent. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the crypt was empty. The spirit was gone. The walls of the church, once heavy with an oppressive energy, felt peaceful now, as if the weight of centuries had been lifted. The faint glow from the symbols faded, and the chamber returned to its former state, dark, cold, and still. David was gone. Evelyn sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had stopped the spirit, ended the curse. But at what cost? As she sat there, mourning the loss of David, she heard the faintest whisper on the wind. At first, she thought it was just the echo of her own grief. But then she heard it again, clearer this time. "Thank you." It was David's voice. Evelyn looked around, but there was no one there. David had paid the price, but his sacrifice had freed the village, the church, and his family from the grip of the spirit. The curse had been broken. The church was no longer a place of fear. The villagers, though few in number, spoke of the strange light that had filled the sky that night, the light that had chased away the darkness that had haunted them for generations. They spoke of it with reverence, though they never fully understood what had happened. All they knew was that the church was no longer a place to fear. Evelyn, though still haunted by the memory of David's sacrifice, knew that she had played a part in something greater than herself. She had uncovered a dark history, yes, but she had also helped to end it. She stood at the church doors one last time, looking out at the village below, the first rays of sunlight piercing the morning mist. The church, now quiet and peaceful, was a reminder that some secrets were buried for a reason, and some pasts were meant to stay in the shadows. But Evelyn had learned that even in the darkest places, there could be redemption. And with that, she turned away from the church, the weight of the past finally lifted, and walked toward a new beginning.